Hi everyone. I wanted to share with you a game that I played at my local chess club recently. The chess club is currently in the middle of its annual championship tournament. So this is where everybody in the tournament gets to play everybody else. So it's a large open section. This was from round two, and I was playing one of the top players in the club. I had the white pieces and he had the black pieces. In fact, my opponent here is someone who's won the club championship in each of the last 3 years. So very strong opponent. And I faced him twice before and lost both games. So not a good outlook for this game, but it's a very interesting game, and I thought I would share it with you. And you might want to look at the moves that Black is playing, because I think he plays some very interesting moves here. Anyway, I have the white pieces here. My rating for the tournament, by the way, is 1822, and my opponent's rating is 2162. So a 340 point difference in rating. I had the white pieces. So previously I had played e4 against him, and then he had the white pieces and he had played d4 against me. Normally at this point in the tournament, I had played e4 in the previous round with white, so in my second white I would normally play d4. But I had this memory, the previous game we had played pretty recently, so I had this memory of playing a d4, d5 game against him, so I decided to play something else, and I started with c4. And then afterwards I remembered, well, actually it was a d4, d5 game, but he was the one who had the white pieces, so it would have been interesting for me to play d4 here and see how he reacts to it. But there's nothing wrong with c4, of course. So he played c5 here. I went knight c3. I went knight c6. So we get a symmetrical variation, and it stays symmetrical for quite a bit. Bishop g2, bishop g7, until this point. I go e4. So this is a sign that I'm going for the Botvinnik setup with the pawns on c4 and e4. I'm going to play pawn to d3, knight to e2, maybe bishop e3, that kind of setup. It's a pretty comfortable setup for white, and I think it's interesting. It gives attacking chances while being very solid. So I think it's a good choice against a strong player, and it's flexible. You can expand on the king side, maybe go for a king side attack, or expand on the queen side, depending upon how Black chooses to set up. Let's see. So he went e6 here. He didn't go with the symmetrical setup. E6 is a nice move, though. It keeps my knight from hopping into this d5 square, while at the same time his knight can use this square. This square is the weakness in the Botvinnik setup, the d4 square. So we'll see Black taking advantage of that in this game. But I continue in the normal setup. Everything is fine to this point. Knight to e7, I castle. It's a little more common to play d3 first, but this seems to be okay. He castled, I went d3. And then here's the first move that is really out of the book. Black played the move rook to b8. So that's a pretty interesting move, I think. He's just getting away from any potential tactics on the long diagonal, maybe in preparation for pushing forward on the queen side. There's always this potential idea with when he's got the pawn back on e6. Sometimes I have the idea of pushing the e4 pawn with a tempo and opening up this diagonal quickly. So he's just dealing with that in advance. There's certainly other moves that Black can play here. The book line continues. Well, this move is in the book. d6, rook to b1, b6, and bishop to e3. So that's how games have been played before, and this looks like a pretty normal setup for both sides. And apparently there's no big threat here. Well, I mean, it's important to note that the way that Black's knights are set up, this knight is defended here, so there's no threat of me pushing e4 at the moment, e4 to e5. So in a way, rook b8 is not at all necessary, but it's an interesting kind of waiting move. It's useful generally, and Black is just saying, okay, what is your plan? So I continue with the normal setup. I go bishop e3. He goes knight d4. He drops his knight into that good square, and he's going to bring the other knight around to support it, I assume. And he's dropping it in at a good point. Right now, if I take, he could take back with the pawn and fork those two pieces, or if I take with the bishop, he could take back with the bishop own the bishop pair, and he would still have this square on d4 to move a piece to. I could try and chase the bishop away, but he could bring his knight out and maintain a piece there, or retreat the bishop and then bring the knight forward to c6. So logical play from black. I went with queen d2 here. Actually, right here, I was kind of fixated in this game on playing on the king side. So I was looking to get in the moves f4, f5 after exchanging off dark squared bishops. But as I mentioned, this Botvinnik setup is a flexible setup, and you can play on either the king side or the queen side. And I should have realized at this point that maybe it'd be better to play on the queen side, because the way black's pieces are set up, his knights have firm control, together with those pawns, of the f5 square. So it's going to be very difficult for me to get in that f5 move in the game, no matter how much I want to play it. Black has got a setup here that kind of mitigates against that. So I should really be thinking about other plans at this point. And the chess engine says rook b1 is a good move here. Rook b1. He continues, say, with knight to c6, a3. And I have to move the rook. Well, not have to. Have to is a strong word, but have to always be wary of the knight b3 move. So certainly before moving my queen to, if I had a queen on d2 and I played a3 there, then that b3 score would be a real weakness with the fork like that. But first moving the rook out of the way and then playing a3, I'm preparing b4, and I don't have to worry about knight b3 at this moment. So good timing on these moves from the chess engine, and that's probably a better way of playing than I played. So with my queen on d2, as I played, in the rook here, I can never really move that a-pawn. He's always got this knight to b3 move. So I'm giving up hopes at this point of playing on the queen side, or at least it would take some more setup to get there than if I had just started playing on the queen side immediately. But well, I had, as I said, these two ideas in mind. One was to trade off his dark squared bishop, and one was to advance on the f-pawn and play on the king side. Let's see. So he continued with a6. He's got his rook set up on the b file, so he can play on the queen side. I went for the trade here. He played his knight to c6, supporting the center. And this is just in preparation. Once this bishop is traded off, then maybe I would take here and get a pawn on that square. So he's prepared to take back with a piece. I went ahead and traded off the bishop and played f4, going on with my plan. And he went to d6 here. So giving his bishop a square, maybe he can play e5 at some point. But I think actually the main idea is to allow the bishop to continue to control this, help control the f5 square. So it's still, he's still preventing my f5 push. And so it is in this position that I make my first slight mistake. I think everything up to this point is kind of a matter of taste in a way. Maybe it was a little more accurate to play on the queen side than on the king side, but this should still be quite a playable position for white. But my next move kind of is a first slight inaccuracy. So the chess engine says now is a good time to just trade. Take here. If he takes back with the knight, I can drop the knight to e2. And now he has to either move this knight away or let me trade it off, and I will end up with a pawn on that square, which is much less dangerous than having a knight there. I was a little bit worried about him taking with the pawn, because if he takes with the pawn, then I can never get to either of these two squares. So it would be hard for me to do a maneuver like this, for example, to bring my knight around to get some pressure on the f5 square. And this is probably also good for black, but probably just taking the first line I gave where he takes with the knight is probably better, even better. But both these lines seem to be playable. So I get to, in this case, I get to put some pressure on that pawn. And let's see. The other move I was thinking about in this position and considering after the game as a way to try and get in this f5 move is a move g4. But g4 doesn't work here. I didn't see this during the game. I checked this out afterwards to see if g4 might have been an improvement on my play. But he has queen h4 here, so he could bring the queen out, attack this pawn. Let's see, I could play h3 defending it. He can play h5 undermining it. And it's interesting, the chess engine is not afraid to open up things around his king. He's got his pieces well arranged, and there's no big danger of an attack on the king side at the moment. So g4 would not have saved me in this position, or would not have accomplished the objective that I wanted to accomplish. So what I played in this position was knight d1. This allows me, this maneuver, knight d1, to e3, to add some more force to this potential f5 move. And I was planning to follow up with g4 and f5. So that was my big plan here when I played knight d1. But now black takes. Knight takes e2 with check. And now, of course, this was a move that he could have played at any time. But if he had played it earlier, then I would just take back with the knight, and I would already have a piece looking at that d4 square. So this is an example of good timing. He waits exactly until I play knight d1 and then plays this immediately. And so, it was probably in his agenda to trade that off and get the other knight there anyway, and I've afforded him that opportunity by playing knight d1. So this is a typical kind of mistake that I make. I look at a move, when I'm planning my moves out, I look at a move like knight d1 and I see the good things it can do for me, and I fail to recognize how I'm helping my opponent by playing that move, because I have to take back with the queen. That was with check, so that was all very forcing. And now he hops the other knight into d4, and I have to move my queen again. So he gets a knight back to the square he wants it to, and he does it with tempo. So that's why my knight d1 move was a slight mistake. It's not like the game is lost, but probably the advantage is shifted at this point, and white is better. And now he follows up. Since I had to move my queen, it's black's move again. He follows up with f5, and now I'm never getting in. my dreams of knight to e3 and g4 have just gone out the window, and I have to find some other way of activating my pieces. I bring the knight to e3 anyway. I think that's still a decent square. I'm looking at some squares on the center, and maybe something will happen over here in the long run later on in the game. So it's not a bad square, but of course his knight is in a good square here. Another idea with knight e3 is maybe I'll drop back to c2 and just trade that off at some point if it becomes an annoyance. But a lot of times in the Botvinnik setup like this, you want to live with the knight here for a while. You don't want to ever give up the option of trading it off, so I would not want to go into a position like this where he's got a knight here and I have a bishop, and the other two minor pieces have been traded, so I could never get rid of it. You always want to keep at least one piece around that can trade off the knight. But you don't necessarily have to trade it off right away. Sometimes you can work around it. And I found that to be an interesting way to play. Let's see. So what happened here? He went f5. I went knight e3. And then he went b5. So he's continuing with the plan he started a long time ago with that first rook b8 move. He's expanding on the queen side. And I took here, which maybe is not directly a mistake, although taking in combination with the next move I play is a second mistake I make in the game. So here's what happened. He took. And these pawns over here are going to become a bit shaky. And notice I still can't play a3 at the moment. But the move I followed up with is worse, makes things worse. I played e takes f5. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to, open up a nice diagonal for the bishop. And also, if he takes back with the e-pawn, then I'll have a square for the knight. And if he takes with a g-pawn, then maybe I've weakened the king side a bit. He's got just two pawns over here. But of course, I think as I was saying in a previous line, he can just take back with the g-pawn. It doesn't matter so much if his king side is weakened slightly. It's actually the center is more important in preventing my knight from hopping in here. So that's an example of good judgment. Let's see. Instead of e takes f5, I could have played knight to c2 right here. And maybe this is the best way to maintain a position that I can still play. Slightly worse, but playable. And the chess engine gives this line just knight takes and queen takes. So it doesn't seem like there's anything great here for black, and I'll try and push my pawns forward and keep his pawns from coming forward too much. But I think he has the advantage here with the more has a slight space advantage, and his pawn structure is a little more solid. I have these two pawns over here, and I'm going to have a weak pawn in the long run over on the queen side. Although, if we go deep enough into the endgame, I may get a pass pawn on the queen side, which could turn into an asset. But for the middle game, black has the better structure. So black is better here, but still playable, I think. I took this way, as I said, and he took back with the g-pawn. And I think by now, after I had gotten to this position, I realized I had made a mistake, because it's a kind of a positional mistake. But I just have this one pawn in the center here. He can't directly attack it at the moment, but it's not going to be able to hold back all of these center pawns that black has got. So I think black has a pretty strong and probably a winning edge at this point. If if I'm playing a strong player like this, probably it's just a matter of how black chooses to win at this point. Anyway, at this point I play knight c2, offering to trade off, and he goes queen f6. So I want to trade, but I didn't want the queen coming here with check and also picking up the b pawn. I still have these weaknesses over here on the queen side. Notice I still can't play pawn to a3 here because of the knight coming into b3 with the fork. And I am getting a bit worried about him pushing this pawn forward and creating this backwards pawn on the a file that I could never advance. So I want to trade this knight off, try and relieve some of this pressure, but I didn't want it going with check. So I play king h1 first, and he doesn't bother with pushing that pawn. He just keeps it where it is and plays bishop to b7. So he may already be thinking of a particular endgame we get to later. Anyway, I went ahead and took here at this point. He takes back with the queen. Notice that he had brought his queen to f6 so that he can always take back with a piece and not mess up his pawn structure. Let's see, and I played rook a to e1, so I use this opportunity to get away from potential pins on the a file and start to put some pressure on the center. He does have a weakish pawn on e6. And maybe I can pile up pressure on that, especially now that he's moved his bishop to this diagonal. And here he played a move that kind of surprised me. He played bishop to d5. Pretty interesting, putting his bishop in front of the pawn. Of course, if I take it, he'll just take back with the queen, so that doesn't do a whole lot. And once again, taking back with the queen will be a check, and then he can grab a pawn over here. So I decided to try and save a pawn with a3. But actually, at this position, in this position, I'm already at a point where I can no longer save a pawn. The chess engine gives this as my best line of play. Queen a3, queen takes, rook takes, and bishop takes a2. Just giving up that pawn in exchange for activating my rooks and maybe getting some pressure here. But the bishop on d5 here, or even on a2, is still doing a good job of defending the one weakness in black's position, this e3 pawn. So nice coordination between his pieces and his pawns there. Here I went with a3 here, just saving my pawn for the moment, and now he pushes on with b4. And I don't want to keep pushing. That pawn will be a real liability. If he can continue to attack it, and even if I get in b3 or a4 and b3, he'll have pressure against that with his light squared bishop, and my bishop is kind of out of play over here. So it's a difficult position. I decide to leave it there and just take out that bishop now. He does get to take back with a check, but at least I don't lose a pawn this time. And then he takes. And, well, I still lose a pawn in the long run, because after I take back, he has rook b3, and that's just a fork. He's attacking both pawns, and I cannot save both of them, and I have to choose which one to save. So after thinking about it, I decided to save the a pawn, because in the long run, if if all the heavy pieces were traded off, this is an outside passed pawn. May be able to do something in the endgame. And my king is, near the center. He's got these passed pawns in the center, but maybe my king will be near enough to slow them down. And sometimes in the endgame, it's not about the quantity of pawns; it's about the quality and how close they are to scoring that really will decide it. So I thought I might have some chances in that endgame. The chess engine here has a nice way of playing. It also agrees, actually, that I should try and save the a-pawn, and it does it in a way I hadn't thought of. It plays the move rook to f2. And so now if the rook takes on a3, I have queen to b2 check, and that would just pick up the rook. So he has to take the d pawn if he wants a pawn, and this is the best move, taking here. Now I throw in queen b2 check, and let's see, he plays rook f6 to block the check, and I play a4. I get in this a4 move and kind of sideline the rook in this line. And but black is still winning with good play here, but that would be best play for me, and an interesting way to defend that pawn and maybe try and get some counterplay. So this move here is, simple and direct. I had actually noticed that I would have this check here after he moved his rook, but I didn't think of using that to defend the a-pawn. That's the difference between me and the computer. So let's see, I played rook a1, he took here. I played queen b2 check. That was how I was planning to get out of trouble without giving up this pawn as well. And because there's problems on the second and third and first ranks here now. So I'll show you in a second. He goes king g6, and now I play the move rook f2. So the move rook f2, which the chess engine wanted to play first, it was a necessary move. If I don't play that, black is threatening to come in here with hitting my queen and threatening checkmate on the g2 square. The fact that he's managed to maneuver his pieces in front of the pawn means that they're also and he's taken all the pawns in the center here, means that my king is in a very exposed position here. The only thing that's kind of saving me at the moment is that his rook is not yet joining in the attack. But well, we'll see black remedying the situation shortly. So I play rook f2 to meet the immediate threat of his rook coming down, and he plays rook to a8. So now we see one difference between the move order that I played and the move order the chess engine played, which is I never got in that a4 move. This pawn is still stuck on a3, and now he's got pressure. I can't push it forward, and he's just threatening to take it. I played queen c1 here. Let's see, the chess engine would play rook e1. Just say, give up that pawn now. But it doesn't think black should take that pawn. Actually, I'm going for counterplay on the e-pawn. So the chess engine would go like this. It would go rook to d4, and I would double like this, and it would block with rook to e4. So it's just trying to put a stop to the pressure along here. And if I take, I guess black will take back with a pawn here and have a passed pawn, another passed pawn. One other point, after I play rook e1, chess engine is giving rook d4 as a move. I just asked it, what about rook takes a3? It just says rook fe2. And now I'm a little faster with pressure against e3. I mean, he could come back and defend, but oh, actually he can't, because this is under pressure. So yeah, this is just better for white than the other line. So rook e1, rook d4 is the way to play it. Anyway, I went with queen c1. I'm just kind of holding on to everything. I'm defending the pawn, still holding on to the second rank, and holding on to the back rank too. He does have that check on the back rank as well. But he has time then to bring this rook in, rook a4, and now you can see all three pieces are getting in front of his pawns, and my king situation is getting dire. I played rook to e2 here. I had an idea of how to defend this after he triples here. I play queen to f1. So it's just basically full-on groveling mode, as my friend likes to call it. I'm just trying to defend everything as best I can. So the queen is defending this square So it's a second defender against the mate on g2, because when he brings his rook down here, I'm going to have to drop this rook back eventually to defend, which would remove a defender from the second rank. So I had to bring the queen over to this side so that I could block with the rook here and still defend the g2 square. So this does seem to momentarily hold things. And now black comes up with a very interesting plan, and one of the main reasons I wanted to show this game. First of all, there is a simple winning plan with just c4, and that's the best move here. But he comes up with a different plan, which makes this kind of really interesting. But of course, c4 is a big threat. It's a passed pawn. He's got all the force he needs to really support it. In combination with mate threats against my king, my pieces are really tied down. So that will be decisive in short order. But instead, right, in this position, c4. But instead he played rook to d1 and allowed me this tactic. There is this tactic here of rook takes e6. So he actually allowed this. So let's go through the game. And well, actually, this might be a good point if you want to try and figure out what black's plan was at this point. Maybe you could come up with some ideas here. Okay, I'm going to talk about what really happened in the game now. So after rook d1, I just took the rook. Maybe I could have played rook takes e6 check first. I think that works just as well. He took, and I took back here. So the idea here is that if he takes, I will take, and let's see, he can come in with a check. This is interesting. He can come in with a check and pick up this pawn. But, well, I take this pawn with check, and actually this position is a draw, so this is something to be avoided. So let's see, after rook d1, I take, he takes, I go with the check. So he doesn't take here, he just moves the king. And this is the best move. Now I have to bring my rook back to defend against this skewer here. And, or pin. And now he just plays queen d4 check. If he could have played this way, actually. He could have taken first. Rook takes, queen d4 check, king g2, and c4. But and so if you thought of this as an idea, it seems like this is good for black, but white gets counterplay, so it's still not clear if black is completely winning here. Now he had calculated a continuation that was just completely winning. He gives another check here, so I can't really move my pieces away very easily. Yeah, if I bring the queen up, then the queen is pinned, so he can take the rook. So I have to move the king. And then he takes the rook. I have to take back. And then he plays queen a4 check. And this was his whole idea. I think he must have calculated this endgame out before he went in to this variation with rook to d1. Because that was all pretty forcing. And now the queen trade is forced. And he gets this pawn. But at this point, I was still thinking I had some chances. Actually, this is just a winning king and pawn endgame. And if you can get to a winning king and pawn endgame, that's the easiest way to win. So definitely the best way to play it. Let's see. But just to show how it works, I played on. I was still thinking I had chances here. I go king g2. Well, first of all, I have to stay in the square of the c pawn there. So I have to start moving my king immediately. He pushes. I have to bring my king over. He pushes. Bring my king over again, and then he just calmly brings up another pawn. Now I can start pushing my a pawn. He can actually still get in the square, but he doesn't bother. He pushes on with d4, and I push on with a5. So he's outside the square of my pawn, and he can't stop me from queening. But he's calculated all this out, and these three pawns against my king are just too strong. I can't stop them. Let's see. It's black's move here too. Black goes d3 check. I went to king d1. I was trying to put my king on a square where it wouldn't get. When I brought my king up here and went here, I was trying to put my king on squares where when this pawn queens, it wouldn't check because that costs me a tempo. And let's see. If I'd kept up that same philosophy, I would have gone king f2 here to go to a square where he still can't queen with check. But he would push, I would push, and he would get the queen, and I would push, and then his king has time to, I mean, his queen has time to come over and round up that pawn. So just in time. Anyway, so I went with king to d1, still trying to slow these pawns down. But he goes with c2 check. I have to step up, and then he plays e3 check. And I resigned here. The king has no move that that will stop that pawn from queening, or something from queening. Let's see, what could I have tried here? I was thinking I had to take, and then he queens with check. I guess I could have tried coming down this way. But then he has this move. If you haven't seen this trick before, this is always a handy thing to know. Go back here to try and stop both pawns, but you can't. You can't stop both of them. So he gets a queen with check anyway. So let's see. At this point, after e3 check, I resigned. So a very good game by Black, and pretty nice example of how a stronger player can win a game without doing a whole lot. The only really deep calculation he did during the game was to set up this winning king and pawn endgame. And I think for the most part he was playing pretty natural moves. So it's not like there was something really extraordinary in the middle game that I overlooked. It was just some slight inaccuracies that I played, and he took advantage of them. And then when it got to the end where he had a overwhelming edge, he just had a choice of different ways to win, and he chose this transposition into or transformation into a king and pawn endgame to win the game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you again soon. Bye.